On the 27th of February 2025, the President came to this House to fulfill his constitutional obligation of giving the message of the state of the nation. But, Mr. Speaker, I believe that this House almost unanimously have now agreed that that statement was indeed a message of lamentations. And I think all of us are agreeable on that. Mr. Speaker, but in spite of that, in spite of the impression the President wanted to give to the country, data and facts are sacrosanct, and the data and the facts confirms clearly, Mr. Speaker, that the state of our national economy, which was bequeathed to President Mahama, which nobody can dispute indeed, is that we had a higher economic growth than our friends from the other side, that we had a higher per capita income than our friends. Agricultural sector, we grew better. Industrial sector, we grew better. We created more jobs than they created in their 8 years in office. Lower fiscal deficit. A primary balance is lower than our friends from the other side. And it goes on and on and on. But, Mr. Speaker, let me address one very important matter, which is the question of the size of government. And indeed, the President, when he addressed this House, made the claim that he had formed the leanest and most effective government in the history of our country. Mr. Speaker, I want to submit that you can have 10 ministers, another government can have 20 ministers, and the government that has 20 ministers may have a smaller government machinery, a smaller government size than you who have 10 ministers. And I want to demonstrate that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's on record. The record is that the pegging or ranking of officials of the presidency are as follows, Mr. Speaker, since the inception of the Fourth Republican Dispensation. The Chief of Staff is pegged at the rank below the Speaker of Parliament, but above a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, a senior presidential advisor is pegged at the level of a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of Parliament. So a senior presidential advisor, by all intents and purposes, their salaries, emolument, conditions of service, is equivalent to a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, a presidential advisor is pegged at the level of a cabinet minister who is not a member of Parliament. A presidential staffer is pegged at the level of a non-cabinet minister who is not a member of Parliament. And a presidential aide is pegged at the level of a deputy minister. These are the rankings since the inception of the Fourth Republican Dispensation. Mr. Speaker, so if you want to see the size of government and its bearing on the national exchequer, Mr. Speaker, don't just look at ministers and deputy ministers. Look at the government holistically. And Mr. Speaker, I want to submit that if you look at this government holistically, there are ministers, deputy ministers, senior presidential advisors, presidential staffers, presidential aides. President Mahama has formed arguably one of the biggest or largest governments in the history of our country as it relates to the cost on the national exchequer. Mr. Speaker, why do I say this? Take, for example, the President has appointed Dr. Valerie Sawyer as senior presidential advisor in charge of government affairs. Her rank is a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of Parliament. So her salary, her emolument, conditions of service, everything to do with her office is at the same rank as a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, he's appointed a presidential advisor on economy, appointed presidential advisor for 24-hour economy, presidential advisor and special aide to the president, presidential advisor on national anti-corruption program, presidential advisor on diaspora affairs. Mr. Speaker, he goes on to appoint presidential advisor, presidential staffer, and special aide to the vice president, presidential staffer for Black Star experience, and then presidential staffer for diaspora affairs. Mr. Speaker, then he goes ahead to appoint 5 policy advisors to the vice president. Mr. Speaker, he tells the country that he's appointed a minister in charge of agribusiness. And yet, he's appointed director at the presidency in charge of agriculture and agribusiness. My good friend Peter Buama Otukono. Mr. Speaker, he says he will not appoint deputy regional ministers. And he appoints 16 presidential staffers in charge of the 16 regions of our country. Mr. Speaker, I want to submit that these presidential staffers in charge of the 16 regions of our country, in essence, as it relates to the cost on the national exchequer, are in fact, indeed, and in substance, deputy ministers of state. Mr. Speaker, he then appoints, Mr. Speaker, listen carefully, please. Mr. Speaker, he then appoints one presidential advisor on media, 4 directors of communication at the office of the president, 5 deputy directors of communication, 2 communication specialists, 5 technical communication assistants, 1 media aide, 1 assistant media liaison officer, 1 communications consultant. Mr. Speaker, I've done the mathematics, and I want to submit. Mr. Speaker, I've done the mathematics that I want to submit, and I do this not from a partisan lens, but I do this as somebody who had the privilege and honor to serve as Deputy Chief of Staff. I know how it works. In terms of the cost on the national exchequer, the President has appointed 100 ministers and deputy ministers. Mr. Speaker, the President has established a Ministry of Youth Development. Mr. Speaker, I want to refer the House and my good friend, Honorable, I will tender all of this, Mr. Speaker. I will tender this. I will tender this. I will tender it. Mr. Speaker, but, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable James Agalga, my very good friend, has talked about how the MPP government terminated some appointments. Mr. Speaker, assuming without admitting that that even happened, shouldn't our governance move forward? Shouldn't we have good governance? And indeed, when we promise resetting, what does that mean? But Mr. Speaker, more importantly, may I refer the House, Mr. Speaker, may I refer the House to Article 191 of our national constitution, which states, and I quote, "A member of the public services shall not be dismissed or removed from office or reduced in rank or otherwise punished without just cause," end quotes. Mr. Speaker, we are building a nation, and there are hundreds and thousands of people out there who have lost their jobs. I think our friends from the other side, the Honorable James Agaga, should join us to appeal to the President, just as he took an oath, Mr. Speaker, on the 2nd schedule of our national constitution, where he said, and I quote, "To protect and defend the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana," end quote. Article 191 is a provision of the Constitution of Ghana, and the President is enjoined to indeed defend and protect this provision of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the President, in the same schedule, swore an oath to do justice to all manner of persons. Some of these people whose appointments have been terminated, some are NDC members, Mr. Speaker. Some are MPP members. Some are non-partisan. Some don't even know what happens in politics. And yet, a president who says he'll be father for all has terminated the appointment. When President Mahama was leaving office, Mr. Speaker, he appointed Mr. Joseph Whittal as the Commissioner for Shraj. He appointed Joseph Nkrumah as Chairman of NCCE. On 23rd December 2016, he appointed Daniel Domevilo as Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, it is not Abu Jinapor,
member, conclude.
or it is not the minority. It's not the minority, Mr. Speaker, who is giving the president names. No, Mr. Speaker, when you go out there on the streets, it's the Ghanaian youth who are talking about that. That the president promised to create jobs, and yet he's come, and the talk on the street is that Mahama Bako terminations, baby. Mr. Speaker, and that is why they have named him. We haven't named him. The minority hasn't named him. They have named him Terminator #1. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we call on the President to rise up to the occasion, to jettison the promises, and Mr. Speaker, and honor his commitments of providing you for the Ghanaian people. What we heard on 27th was a message of lamentations and not a State of the Nation address. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the attention.